I was tired in the best possible way. The kind of tired that comes from doing something that matters. 3 weeks volunteering at the Literacy Center in Savannah, helping adults learn to read for the first time in their lives. I had packed that trip full of purpose, the way you do when you're trying not to think about what's waiting for you at home. My husband and I had been married for 31 years. His name was Gerald, and I loved him. Or I loved the man I thought he was, which turns out to be a very different thing. The drive back to our house in Greenville, South Carolina took 4 hours. I sang along with the radio for the first 2, then went quiet for the last 2. Something sat heavy in my chest the closer I got. I told myself it was just exhaustion. I was wrong. I pulled into the driveway at 7:30 in the evening. The lights inside were on. Gerald's car was there, and so was another one I didn't recognize. A silver sedan with a pine tree air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. I could see it through the windshield as I walked past. I used my key. It didn't turn. I stood there on my own front porch, the porch with the hanging fern I had planted 11 springs ago, and tried my key again. And again, the lock had been changed. I remember the exact sound it made, that flat, hollow click of a key that has no business being there anymore. I knocked. Footsteps. Then Gerald's voice through the door, careful and low. "Who is it?" I said. "Gerald, it's me. My key isn't working." A long pause, the kind of pause that rewrites 31 years. The door opened, but only halfway. He stood in the gap, and he looked. I will never forget this. He looked relieved, as though he had been dreading this moment and was glad it was finally here. "Margaret," he said, "you're back early." "I'm back on time," I said. "Gerald, what is going on?" He opened the door the rest of the way then, and I saw her. She was standing in my kitchen, leaning against my counter, wearing my mother's cardigan, the one with the small pearl buttons, the pale blue one my mother had given me the Christmas before she passed, the one I kept folded in the cedar chest at the foot of our bed. She was wearing it like it was hers, like she had always worn it. I don't remember moving. I remember being in the doorway, and then I remember being in the kitchen, 3 feet from her, looking at those pearl buttons. "Take that off," I said. My voice was very quiet. She looked at Gerald. He looked at the floor. "Margaret." He said my name the way people say it when they want you to be smaller. "I need you to stay calm." "That is my mother's cardigan," I said. "She has been gone for 2 years, and I need that woman to take it off right now." She took it off. She handed it to me without a word, and I folded it against my chest, and I stood there in my own kitchen while my husband of 31 years told me that things had changed, that he and I had grown apart, that he had met someone, that he thought it was best if I found somewhere else to stay, tonight and going forward. He had spoken to a lawyer already. Of course he had. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a separation agreement, already drafted, with a line at the bottom waiting for my signature. He had been planning this. He had changed the locks before I got home. He had her moved in, her clothes in my closet, her things on my bathroom shelf, while I was in Savannah teaching a retired bus driver named Calvin how to read a prescription bottle for the first time in his 64 years. I put my mother's cardigan in my purse. I picked up the bag I had brought in from the car. I did not sign anything, and I walked out. I sat in my car for a long time. The streetlights came on. A neighbor's dog barked twice and then went quiet. I watched the light in my bedroom window, what used to be my bedroom window, and I thought about 31 years. The house we had chosen together, the vacations, the illness I had nursed him through 11 years ago when we thought it was something serious and it turned out not to be. And I had held his hand in that hospital room and told him we were going to be just fine. I had $67 in my wallet. My phone was at 11% battery. My bank card are joint account. I didn't know if he'd moved the money. I didn't know what he'd done. I pulled it up on my phone. $43. He had moved everything else somewhere I couldn't reach. I was 62 years old. I was sitting in a car at my own driveway. I had my mother's cardigan and $43 and 11% battery life. I drove to a gas station and charged my phone in the parking lot for an hour, sitting in the front seat with a cup of coffee I didn't drink. I called my friend Denise, but she didn't pick up. I called my sister Carol, and she did, and she told me to come to her house in Columbia, and I started to cry, which I had not done yet, and she talked to me until I stopped. Come here, she said. Tonight, right now. I drove to Columbia. It took 45 minutes. Carol met me at the door with her arms open, and I walked in and she said, "You are not going back there." And for that night, I believed her. I stayed with Carol for 2 weeks. She gave me her guest room with the yellow curtains, and I slept there and tried to understand what my life had become. I called a lawyer. I started to take stock of what I actually had, which turned out to be less than I thought and more complicated than I expected. Gerald and I had never had children, which had been a grief and then a peace, and then just a fact. What we had was the house, the joint accounts, and 31 years of a shared life that he was now trying to untangle on his terms with his lawyer on his timeline. My own lawyer, a woman named Diane, who had short gray hair and the calmest eyes I have ever seen, told me to gather every financial document I could access. Statements, tax returns, anything in my name. "What's in your name, Margaret?" she asked me on our second meeting. "Think carefully." What belongs to you, I thought. The house was joint. The accounts were joint or had been emptied. My car was mine. My retirement account from the school district where I had worked for 18 years was mine. And then I thought of something I hadn't thought of in a long time. My father. He had died when I was 38, a cardiac event sudden on a Tuesday morning in October. He had been a quiet man, a careful man. He worked as a draftsman for most of his life, and he had a particular kind of precision in everything he did. He was not a man who left loose ends. After he died, I had helped my mother sort through his papers. She had handled most of the estate, and she was thorough, and I had trusted her completely. When she passed 2 years ago, Carol and I had gone through her things together, and there had been an attorney who handled her estate, and it had all been taken care of, or so I had believed. But there was a box. A plain cardboard box, not large, that I had taken from my mother's house because it had my name on it in my father's handwriting. Margaret's. Just that. I had put it in the back of my car, meaning to go through it, and I had never gotten around to it, and then it had ended up in the closet of our guest room at home, and when Gerald had handed me my bag that night, he must not have known about it because it wasn't in the bag. I called Carol. "Do you have a box?" I asked her. "A cardboard box with my name on it in Dad's handwriting?" She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said, "but I remember you taking one. From Mom's closet. You put it in your trunk." I had it. It was in the back of my car, under a blanket, still there. I had carried it with me when I drove to Columbia without even knowing. I brought it inside that night, and I sat on the bed in the guest room with the yellow curtains, and I opened it. Inside, a folder of papers held together with a rubber band that crumbled when I touched it. A photograph of my father and a man I didn't recognize, shaking hands outside a brick building. 3 envelopes, sealed, with my name on them in my father's hand, and a business card. The card was cream-colored, heavier than ordinary stock. On one side, my father's name, Harold Eugene Whitmore, and a title I had never seen before, licensed patent holder and independent inventor. On the other side, in smaller print, the name of a law firm, Baxter and Leonard, LLC, an address in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a handwritten note in the corner in my father's precise architectural script for Margaret only. "Call when ready." My father had died 24 years ago. This card had been sitting in a box with my name on it for 24 years. I opened the first envelope. It was a letter from my father, dated 6 months before he died, written in the same careful hand as the note on the card. He wrote that he had never spoken to me about certain things because he wanted to protect me from worry, and because he didn't know how things would turn out. He had been working, he wrote, for nearly 15 years on a series of mechanical inventions, components related to industrial fastening systems, the kind of technical work that sounds unremarkable until you understand that industrial manufacturing touches nearly everything made in this country. He had filed patents, several of them, and he had placed the rights to those patents inside a trust, structured so that they would pass to me upon his death, held and managed by Baxter and Leonard. He wrote that he didn't know what the patents would be worth. He wrote that he hoped it would be something, and that if it was nothing, He was sorry for the mystery. He wrote that he loved me and that I had always been steadier than I knew, and that if I ever needed something to stand on, he hoped this might be it. My hands were shaking. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat very still in the room with the yellow curtains for a long time. The next morning, I drove to Charlotte. The offices of Baxter and Leonard were on the 4th floor of a building downtown, quiet and carpeted, with framed technical drawings on the walls. A receptionist asked my name. I gave it. She made a brief phone call. And then a man came out, older, with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful, measured manner of someone who has been carrying something on behalf of someone else for a very long time. "Mrs. Whitmore Calloway," he said. And then he stopped. He looked at me over his glasses and he said, "We have been waiting to hear from you." His name was Mr. Leonard. He was the son of the original Leonard, who had worked with my father directly. He walked me into a conference room, and he sat down across from me, and he opened a file that was, I noticed, very thick. "Your father's patents," he began, "were acquired by a manufacturing consortium in 2009. The licensing agreement your father structured before his death entitled his estate, which means his trust, which means you, to a percentage of royalties on every unit produced using those components." I looked at him. I said, "How long has this been active?" "Since 2009, he said. 14 years of royalty accumulation. Your mother had limited authority as a secondary trustee, but the principal distribution authority was yours alone, triggered only by your direct contact with this office." He paused. He removed his glasses and cleaned them with the deliberateness of a man choosing his words. "She may not have fully understood the structure, or she may have meant to tell you and didn't find the right time. I can't speak to that. I thought about my mother, her practicality, her privacy, the things she kept close. I thought about the box sitting in my closet for 2 years. What is the current value of the trust?" I asked. He told me. "I will not write the exact number here because it still doesn't feel real, but I will say that it was substantial. It was the kind of number that changes the shape of a room." I sat with it for a moment. Then I said, "What do I need to do?" He slid a packet of documents across the table. "Sign these," he said, "and it becomes active in your name immediately." I signed. I drove back to Carol's house. I sat in her kitchen while she made coffee, and I told her everything. She wept very still. Then she started laughing, and then she started crying, and then she got up and hugged me for a long time without saying anything. "Dad," she said finally, "just that, just his name." I hired Diane to accelerate the divorce proceedings. With independent financial standing, the dynamic shifted considerably. Gerald's lawyer had structured everything around the assumption that I was dependent, that I would need to negotiate from weakness, that I would sign the first agreement to have something to live on. That assumption turned out to be incorrect. I won't say Gerald was a bad man. I think he was a person who made a series of choices and then had to live with the consequences of them, which is all any of us can say. But I will say that the divorce was settled in a way that was fair, which is more than he had offered me on the night he handed me a manila envelope and a changed lock. I bought a house in Asheville. Not large, 3 bedrooms, a back porch, a yard with 2 old oak trees. I planted a garden that first spring. Tomatoes, basil, a row of lavender along the south fence that came in slow and then all at once. I set up a scholarship through my father's trust, the Harold E. Whitmore Scholarship for Adult Literacy. The first recipient was a woman from Greenville, 57 years old, who was going back to school to get her nursing credentials. She sent me a card after the first semester. She had written in the card, "I didn't think anyone believed in me anymore. I do now. I keep that card on my refrigerator." I went back to Savannah the following year to volunteer again at the Literacy Center. I taught a woman named Gloria who was 69 years old and said she had been embarrassed her whole life, and by the end of our 6 weeks together, she could read the Bible passage she had been meaning to read at her granddaughter's christening, and she did. I still have my mother's cardigan. It sits in the cedar chest I brought from the house in Greenville, the one piece of furniture Gerald didn't contest, maybe because he knew it was never really his. On cold mornings, I take it out sometimes and fold it in my lap and think about my mother and my father in his workshop with his precise hands and his quiet plans, and I think about the box sitting in the back of my car for 2 years. My father wrote, "If you ever need something to stand on, I hope this might be it." I needed it, and it was. I am 63 years old. I live in a house I own. I have a garden and 2 oak trees and a scholarship in my father's name. I wake up in the morning and the life I'm living is mine, built on something real, something laid down for me before I knew I would need it, by a man who loved me quietly and well and made sure that quiet love would find me when I was ready. It found me, and I was ready. If you're watching this and you are somewhere you don't want to be, if someone has handed you a bag and pointed you toward the door, I want you to know that the ground is not always as far down as it looks. Sometimes the person who loved you best left something behind that you haven't found yet. Sometimes the box with your name on it is already in your car. Go look. Thank you for being here with me. If this story reached you, please share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. I read every single one. And subscribe if you'd like to stay. There are more stories where this came from. I'll see you in the next one.